Morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I apologize for the Ed Committee starting a little bit late this morning, but did want to start off with our first item on our agenda, which is our resolution to approve a categorical transfer of $1.6 million and transfers of $720,000 for the FY18 grants for future supported projects. So let me turn it over to Mr. Howard to walk us through. Welcome to both Tom and Nancy. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Ms. O'Neill, member of our Board of Education, for being here as well. Mr. Howard.
Thank you. So I'll kind of quickly walk through the packet, and I do want to note there is a technical amendment then recommending on the resolution related to the grant funds, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But the beginning, well, let's talk about the MCPS operating fund balance, as that information came over as part of their year-end financial report. At the end of the FY18, they had a fund balance, year-end surplus of $31.8 million. And you can see on the table at the bottom of the first page that the council reappropriated $25 million of this amount in fund balance, and it leaves an unappropriated remainder of $6.8 million, which is larger than typical, and we'll get to why that is in just a minute. On page 2, we just have some historical information about the MCPS year-end fund balance and how much the council has reappropriated, and the numbers have, over the past few years, have come closer together as the council has worked closely with MCPS during the budgeting process to make sure everyone's on the same page about what the fund balance will be and how much is needed to reappropriate as part of the budgeting process. So the larger than anticipated FY19 fund balance going into the year is due to the Board of Ed and Superintendent's decision to reissue its RFP for the new curriculum. There was money budgeted in FY18 when they decided to reissue the RFP. That money was not spent, and so then rolled over and became part of fund balance. So the plan is, when the new RFP that has been issued and after it's been determined the vendor for that proposal, they plan to issue a supplemental appropriation request where they would ask us to reappropriate some of that $6.8 million to fund that new curriculum. So it'd be using the dollars that had already been set aside for that, just weren't spent in the prior year. And if that does occur, that would not affect the FY19 maintenance of effort calculation, because those monies have already been appropriated, just like the dollars that we reappropriate every year. Any questions or comments on that issue? Okay. And then with the categorical transfers, the operating budget, the operating fund transfer is $1.6 million. And this is a transfer from Category 3 instructional salaries to Category 11 maintenance of plant. The table at the top of page 3 shows for each category what the year-end balance was and the percent of the appropriation. As typically happens, instructional salaries has the largest surplus. It was $16.3 million this year, but that's a low percentage, 1.6% of the total MCPS budget for that category. Of course, that's MCPS's people, and so most of the dollars are in the salaries category. So when there is savings from lapse and turnover, it typically does occur in that category. With the grant fund, the resolution that's introduced included a transfer of $720,000 from the grant fund, and that was based on the board's March 22nd transmittal. The board had also requested an additional transfer of $160,000 in the grant funds for the provision for future supported projects in June, and that was because they received some additional grants later in the year that they weren't anticipating and needed to move money around, because the grants fund, they at the beginning of the year, they anticipate where those monies will fall in different categories, but when the grants come in, sometimes those allocations have to be changed. So I'm recommending an amendment to increase the grant fund transfer to $750,000 from $720,000. The tables on page 4 kind of show the different transfer requests from March 22nd and June 25th. When you add them all together, it equals up to $880,000, but as you can see in categories 3 and 5, there's both a to and a from. So when we net those out, it actually, the total transfer amount that they need is $750,000. So on circles 24 through 26 of the packet, I prepared a revised resolution. And the changes are on circles 25, clause 4 in the background section, provides the information from the June 25th Board of Education request, which was not included previously. And then on circle 26, the description of the to's and froms from the different categories is adjusted to reflect the additional request from the board. And so my recommendation is to approve the operating budget transfer as requested and then the amended grant fund transfer.
So I'll ask my colleagues if there's any objection to the staff recommended amendments. Okay. All right. I did just want to ask a question now. When we're talking about the direction of it headed towards maintenance of plant and equipment, can you tell me a little bit about what that would go towards? Is that HVAC, things of that nature? A lot of things that we understand some of our schools are challenged with, remediation for emergency projects that we're hearing from some of our schools they're facing.
Yes, sir, Mr. Rice. Well, first of all, the number of work orders that our system deals with each year is reaching over 80,000, and we have a backlog each year, which is increasing as well. And so many of the projects are HVAC related, but there's the EPA requirements as well that include the radon testing that we did in 2018. And so that combination resulted in the shortage that we had in that category. We've actually had a shortage for the last 2 or 3 years in the maintenance category, and we continue to work to budget. We try to predict what the amount will be, but there's always unforeseen items that happen over the course of the year that we have to account for.
Certainly, and I think that, again, this highlights something that we'll want to take a look at when it comes to budget and making sure that we're paying very close attention to this. I know that as we continue to struggle with the state when it comes to adequate funding for school facilities, and really so we're trying to keep some of our schools together until we can actually get the funds necessary to do the new revamping of schools that may not be a complete raising and building a new school, but either way, we still need those funds to be able to do those kinds of projects. And until then, we're going to have to probably look at repurposing more dollars in this same sort of instance to do those kinds of things. So I look forward to working with you guys and having more conversations about this as we approach budget for next year. It's going to be incredibly important for us. Okay. Any other comments from my colleagues? All right, so without objection for the categorical transfers. All right, we'll move on to our next item. Thank you very much. We'll move on to our next item, which is a supplemental appropriation to the FY18 operating budget for Montgomery County Public Schools Entrepreneurial Activities Fund in the amount of $4.7 million for the school bus safety camera program. As we have our folks come up, Ms. O'Neill from the board, Dr. Zuckerman, the Chief Operating Officer for MCPS, Todd Watkins, who's the Director of Transportation, Captain Tom Didone, who's our Director of our Traffic Division for Montgomery County Police Department, and Richard Hetherington, who's the Manager of the Automated Traffic Enforcement Initiatives, also within Montgomery County Police Department. Let me just start off by saying that this is something that folks know is near and dear to my heart. It's really something that continues to be troubling to me as well, in seeing how many people continue to pass school buses. It really was, I think, smart for us to invest in a program that continued to promote the safety of our children going to and from school while riding school buses. I've seen it firsthand to where folks are passing school buses. All of us have. As I've heard from folks, and it's incredibly dangerous and unfortunately has very dire consequences in some instances. We've been fortunate and lucky here, but that doesn't mean that with the number of incidents that we have, it's just something that I continue to fear. The next day we're going to hear about those kinds of dire consequences happening here in Montgomery County. So it's the reason why Captain Didone and I, who traveled to Annapolis and fought for additional higher penalties for people who pass school buses, needed to happen, but also talk about some of the things that aren't talked about. And I'll certainly turn it over to you guys to talk a little bit more about this. But part of our program also includes cameras inside the bus. And because we have those cameras inside the bus, they've actually helped us with an investigation that actually was incredibly important to getting evidence that we needed to in a particular case. And I'll certainly let school board or MCPD talk about that. But that's the reason why I think this program is so important. When we talk about the safety of our children as they go to and from school, there certainly is no question that we need to have this program. And the simple fact that it's at no cost to the county, and I want to reiterate that, even though, and we'll explain why we're doing this fund transfer, but at no cost to the county for us to make sure that we're ramping up the safety of our kids is incredibly important. And so I'm going to stop there. I'm going to turn to my colleagues if they have any comments before I turn it over to Mr. Howard and the school system.
Fine.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Elrich, Chair of the Public Safety Committee.
You're going to go, sorry, you're going to go through the, you're going to go through the data on the expenditures.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I just wanted to turn over if you had any opening comments. And so it's actually great to have the Chair of the Public Safety Committee as well as a part of this, because it certainly dovetails on both sides. So, Mr. Howard, I'll let you walk through the packet, and then Dr. Zuckerman and Ms. O'Neill, I'll let you let the conversation flow from there.
Great, thank you. So I think what I'll do is I do want to give a little bit of brief background and history on the contract, because I know there's been some questions about the contract and the status of that before we go into some information from MCPS and the police department on the contract, as well as the data on the number of citations. But to start with, this supplemental appropriation would be a transfer from the county's general fund of revenue that's been collected from citations from those who violate, who pass illegally pass a bus. So it's not new tax dollars or anything like that, and it's to fund cameras that have already been installed by the vendor. So the contract is that the vendor installs the cameras at no cost to the county, and then we reimburse the vendor as we collect revenues from the citations. So that's what the $4.7 million is. It's revenue that's already been collected from citations. So in March 2012, the council passed legislation enabling the county to implement a school bus camera program. In 2013, the police department entered into an initial contract with the vendor to implement a pilot project. This was for 25 buses beginning in fiscal year 2014. Physical constraints prevented additional buses from additional cameras from being installed in FY15 and 16. So at that point, MCPS and the police department went looking for different models and different vendors, and they chose a vendor, and the board authorized a contract with a new vendor, which at the time was called Force Multiplier Solutions and is now Bus Patrol America. In May 2016, MCPS signed a contract with Bus Patrol America to provide the comprehensive school bus system to MCPS school buses, and also MCPS and the county signed a memorandum of understanding to set forth the way the program would work with regard to the MCPS and the police department. MCPS didn't issue a RFP for this contract. Instead, they bridged an existing contract under the Intergovernmental Cooperative Purchasing Agreement, which is allowed by state law. And again, the vendor installs the cameras, and then MCPS reimburses them from citations, and until the vendor's capital investment is recovered. At the time, that was estimated to be around $15 to $18 million before their capital investment would be recovered. Under the MOU between MCPS and the county government, the police department reviews and issues all citations, and the revenue accrues to the general fund, and then we transfer that through processes such as these to the MCPS's Entrepreneurial Activities Fund. It is important, I think, to note that the police department is the one who reviews and issues the citations. Some of the news articles that have come out have talked about other jurisdictions where they've allowed a private contractor to issue citations, but I just want to be clear that that's not the case in Montgomery County. The Joint Public Safety and Education Committee held a work session in July 2016 to discuss the program and have initial discussion of the contract, proposed contract. And then in FY17, the council did approve an initial supplemental appropriation of $1.5 million to reimburse the vendor for the initial cameras that were installed. So the contract began in July 2016 with a 5-year term and 5 additional 1-year options to renew. In 2017, Force Multiplier Solutions was purchased and renamed Bus Patrol America. And this occurred after their CEO was charged with and eventually pled guilty to participating in a bribery and kickback scheme along with a Dallas City Council member and the Dallas County Superintendent of Schools. So as a result, the MCPS contract, their existing contract, was taken over by the new company, Bus Patrol America. MCPS and both the police department report they've had positive experiences in working with the new company as compared to the previous company, and they can address any questions about that. Currently, there are 500 buses that have cameras installed, and 400 more will be outfitted by the end of 2018. And MCPS anticipates the entire fleet of 1,350 buses will be outfitted with cameras by the start of the 2019-2020 school year. And as you noted, Mr. Rice, all the buses have 14 total cameras, 7 in the enforcement box on the driver's side, 3 additional exterior cameras covering the front, back, and the passenger side of the school bus, and then the 4 interior cameras. So with that, I'll stop there for any questions and discussion about the contract.
Perfect. I'm going to turn to Councilmember Navarro first, and then Councilmember Elrich.
Thank you. So just for clarification purposes, so the contract is to basically install the cameras on all our buses, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then you said something to the effect that it would be about a $17 million until they're able to.
That was the initial estimate when the Public Safety and Education Committees talked about the contract back in July.
And that was to outfit all the.
To outfit all the buses. I don't know, has that dollar amount changed, the estimate changed at all?
No, we're still on that same. Your microphone. We're still on that same rough guideline. I mean, obviously, inflation costs.
Right.
A couple years, there may be some incremental increases, but it's still in that same ballpark.
Okay, and this $4.7 million that we are approving, so this had to do with the citations that were collected, and what was the period? Was it a year period?
We went live October 13th, 2016.
Okay,
With
so roughly
with
2
the
years.
first group, and we've been implementing ever since. In fact, they're doing installs right now. They actually increased the number that they expect to get installed by another 45, so we'll probably be around 945 roughly by mid-December. And then after the first of the year, we'll start planning on the next group to go in, so.
Okay. So presumably then, if we already, I mean, the fact that we are going to, approve this transfer of 4.7, et cetera, so it won't take us that long, I guess, to get to that $15 to $17 million mark. Is
right.
that the
Anytime
case?
they install buses, they add to that.
They add to that.
that number, so.
Okay.
at
To the
this-
17, to the 15 million?
No, to the total, right? So,
Right.
with the 500 we have now, we were down to, I'm gonna use the word deficit, even though it's not really probably the right word, but we were down to a little under $1 million before we were break even, but now they're installing 445 more. So that cost to them gets added to that, so that widens it, and then we'll work back to that, and they'll have more buses. Until the whole fleet gets outfitted, it'll be hard to give a definitive timeline when we're gonna reach that break-even point. More buses get outfitted, the more cost is out there that we have to make up. But we're still roughly tracking the timeline that we predicted from the beginning.
And
It- this
that 15 to
50.
18 million, we anticipated would not even come into fruition until 2019, 2020. And then I forecasted that it would take us at least a year after all the buses are outfitted till we got to the point where the break-even point would be
Right,
formal forever.
right. But this 4.7 factors into that total 15 million?
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's what I was trying to
Yeah.
kind of understand in terms of the broad picture.
Yeah.
And I guess my second question, of course, had to do with this, with what we found out. I know there were some articles that had come through. We had some testimony regarding the issue with the company and the problems, et cetera. And so I assume, of course, that, and I think Chairman Rice did say that, there had been careful consideration to this particular company, understanding who was involved in the scandal, et
I can
cetera,
give you the
right?
whole backstory.
Yes, that would be
in a
great.
nutshell, if you
Yeah,
like.
because I think
So,
that public would
success
like to
was-
know.
So let me go even back before that. Our speed and red light vendor was Xerox, then now it's Conduit, they just changed their name. As Todd can tell you, there's a 1 or 2 days a year where bus drivers self-report how many times they were passed. And we would get reports on that number, and we were thinking, man, that's really high. There's no way it can be that high. So we talked to our speed and red light vendor, who isn't in the school bus business, doesn't want to get in the school bus business. They said, well, we could probably come up with a solution to put about 25 buses out there to see if we can verify some of that data. So that's what that initial pilot was that was talked about earlier. There was never any intent to expand that with them. They didn't want to get into the school bus business. So when we ran that pilot for 2 years and determined that, yeah, that number is pretty high, and we have a problem on our hands that we didn't realize the magnitude of. So that's when we became aware of force multiplier and their business model, which was to, at no cost to the jurisdiction, we'll do all the installations. They get 100% of the revenue until you get to that break-even point. So we started down the path with force multiplier. As a franchise here, they had a couple contracts in Dallas and Baton Rouge, which was mentioned earlier, and a couple other places down in the South. So at that time, unbeknownst to us or anybody else at that time, another logistics business in Canada had met with leaders of Force Multiplier trade show out on the West Coast. And they got to talking, and this company from Canada said, oh, we may have some applications for that type of technology here in Canada. So they started talking. Well, the business in Canada was trying to get equipment for some jurisdictions up there. Equipment they thought they had purchased from Force Multiplier had already been sold to another place, which Race and Red Flags are selling the same equipment twice to two different people. So they are actually the ones that reached out to the Department of Justice and said, there's something going on here. So they have been very helpful in unearthing all of that was going on in Dallas. So when it became apparent that there was going to be problems, they bought all the intellectual property from that company and essentially took over that company because they knew that the previous people were going to jail.
The Canadian firm?
Right.
Yes. So they now own all the intellectual property, all the franchises in this country and what they have established in Canada. They're very, they're better funded and better run than the original company that we started dealing with. It's been a pretty positive turn for this project that they took over. So we're moving forward probably a little more robustly than we would have had we stayed with Force, or had Force Multipliers.
Ms. Navarro, just to answer your question, except for when we sent representatives down to Dallas, Texas to review the company to make sure it was real and genuine, our dealings with FXS was with a franchisee. In other words, the gentleman that's in trouble, we never dealt with on a daily basis. They built out a franchise model, and we dealt with two other individuals that were based out of Virginia. So although the shenanigans may have been going on in Texas, we have been insulated and isolated and have had no concerns about our actions here in Montgomery County.
And you mentioned that the Justice Department was the one who was contacted and started doing the investigation, so.
In fact, they were
Right.
aware and even blessed the takeover and said, we understand what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
We support it. You're.
Thank you. I mean, I think that's very important, just for the public to understand, that, obviously, when you do have the Justice Department conducting an investigation and things are, changed, et cetera, there is obviously monitoring that, has taken place, and that just takes it to a totally different level. So I think that is very important. Oftentimes it is difficult to communicate to the public a lot of, particulars in terms of different decisions that are made, and so what gets out there just becomes all of a sudden, a great deal of concern, which is, I understand, but, this is why it's important to have these conversations over and over. Really
right.
appreciate it.
Councilmember Elrich.
So would the math be that you add 4.7 million to the 10.4 million that we've already expended, and that would get us to 15 million?
The 4.7 million is actually part of that 10.4 million that's already been collected.
But it says total
So-
expenditures in FY18 were 7.9 million.
Right, I think that's
So I'm
late.
looking at I'm assuming that the expenditures are the money going to Force Multiplier, whoever the company is, right?
Yes, eventually that will go to bus patrol, but I think it's labeled as an expenditure because it's going to be transferred eventually to.
That number is more of a placeholder for collected in future citation revenue that will get transferred over to them.
The expenditures so far are the documented expenditures by Bus Patrol America of what they're expending to outfit all the buses and run the program.
I'm not sure, I mean, I'm looking at the number that says gross revenue is identical to gross expenditures.
Because by contract, they
Right.
get 100%
Right.
of the revenue. So everything that gets collected gets expended back to them.
Right.
That's why those numbers match.
I guess why I'm confused is we're talking about appropriating
Right.
4.7 million now. But I've got something that says I've spent 7.9, and you're saying the 4.7 is part of a number you said you already expended.
Yeah. I was just going to say, you're correct, Councilmember Eldridge, that line shouldn't say total expenditures because they haven't actually been expended. It's those are money that's going to be expended from the revenue that's collected.
It's encumbered funds.
But it
It's
should be,
encumbered.
it should be that,
something along those lines.
the dollar amount should be the 4.7 million that's for consideration right now, plus the additional 1.5 million from the prior year. The other dollars will be spent to reimburse Bus Patrol America over the course of the project.
And the expenditure is coming out of an income line that's an income line in the budget that resulted from the citations.
Yes, so the gross revenue line, that is all the income that comes in from the citations. And then the expenditures eventually will match that because we're, under the contract, we're obligated to reimburse them up until that crossover point, which we haven't reached yet.
Councilmember.
There's usually some lag in revenue. People, as you can imagine, they don't pay it right away. They wait till their tags get flagged, and it's a year later, and they go to renew their tags, and they have to then pay the fine. So while we issue the citation in, say, 2018, we may not see the revenue until 2019 or even 2020 in some cases.
And in a lot of cases, this is always a fluid, and for me, being the regular cop, it's always confusing. And I was thinking if it was a zone fund, and money collected in that fund would be a whole number, and money taken out of that fund would be a whole number, and it would be very transparent. But
Right.
because we're involving the general fund and all this, it becomes forecasting. And in automated enforcement, anytime you forecast, the Washington Post just lights up like a pinball machine, and we start predicting. So sometime maybe down the road, making this its own fund that we can reimburse the school for their own fund would be 1 + 1 = 2, and I call that Montgomery County
It
math.
would be nice to do that for all of the automated programs that we have.
Yeah.
Because like the captain said, trying to forecast revenue based on offender violations is
Right.
you're throwing darts at a dartboard. I mean, you can look at historical numbers and predict, a trend or where it may be going, but with any degree of accuracy, it's extremely difficult when it's all offender-based.
If only we had the chair of government operations here. I mean, that would be great to hear that.
Wait a second. What kind of statement is that?
So
She's been here all along, and we'll be happy to work with both the chair of the Public Safety Committee and the Ed Committee to perhaps create some kind of NDA that would address this issue.
Fantastic.
a little
Same
clarity.
issue, just ask.
A little clarity would have been helpful. The other thing I want to say is, I had a problem with the contract in the first place. I continue to think it's wrong to do no bid contracts. You could have gone to this buy if you didn't get a bid that was a lower price, and to automatically go to this as opposed to putting this out to bid, I just think is wrong. And I've looked at a number of expenditures that the school board has made, and sometimes I wonder whether you're getting the best prices that are out there by simply piggybacking on available vehicles. I think there's some merit in going through bidding process, particularly for large items like this. And part of me wonders why, given what happened with the company, that wasn't an opportunity to see whether there were other vendors out there to bid the thing.
Well, and we're getting ready to go through an RFP process for our speed and red light contract, which expires in November. And in my experience in dealing with this one in particular and others, for what we do in these three programs, it's important to remember that we also have legal obligations as far as evidence goes and things like that to go to court. And sometimes lowest price doesn't put us where we need to be from an evidentiary standpoint.
Except you don't know that until
Well,
you get a low price
we
bid and
do
then
we do-
evaluate
We
it.
do the research. We know that there's a limited number of people that do this type of work. We're well aware of what their product is and their equipment and what they can deliver and what they can't deliver. And some of these companies will, from a pricing perspective, like what they expect to get per ticket and that kind of thing, will undercut everybody to be the lowest possible price, but they can't deliver. They don't have the technical level in their equipment. And you can look at our speed and red light vendor who did our school bus pilot. The comparison between their technology and this company's technology, it's like watching an old black and white TV compared to 3D and IMAX. I mean, the differences are amazing. The quality of the evidence that we get from this particular vendor is light years ahead. No offense to Xerox, they're not in that business. But the difference in quality of evidence it's light years apart.
I still think that's something you discover in the bidding process. And I appreciate what you say, but I doubt if this is the only company that provides a proper, certifiable, valid, nice camera program. They can't.
I'm not saying that that's not the case, but we've prided ourselves here on being the model program for the country, not just in school bus, but in speed and red light. So we hold a higher standard to what we produce than probably other places do. And that's why we have the recognition that we do.
Someday I'm going to ask you to prove that.
Okay.
You just can't say that. I don't believe that other people do low-quality products and.
I think it's low quality.
Or
It's just
that they're not
as
interested in.
high quality as what we have now.
Okay,
I will embrace the challenge in the future, sir.
yeah.
I'll take on the challenge in the future.
Well, let me just say this, Councilmember Elrich, I've actually been approached at Mako with a number of folks who are in the business, who are very interested in bidding on the contract for Montgomery County. And let me just tell you that not only in terms of the quality of the product that they're producing, but also the setup of the arrangement. The arrangement that we have that actually says that our folks will do the actual validation of the tickets is something that's a very big deal with a lot of the other vendors. And they want to do that because what happens is then they control the revenue stream that comes in and are deciding which ones are kicked and which ones aren't. There are a number, and I don't know if we have those numbers in terms of the number of citations that are actually kicked by the police department as, no, this one was questionable, whatever the case, whereas in other instances with other vendors, they might not make those same kinds of judgments. So there are a number of factors that go into it. I know I've talked to vendors before about, as they approached, I forwarded some to Captain Didone, who had expressed interest in the program. So I think that they're looking at them while they might not vet them through an RFP process. Certainly by them presenting the information as well as the setup for what they're looking for can give you enough information to evaluate whether or not that program is appropriate for what we're looking to do here. Now, while I do agree with you in some instances where certainly the school system may benefit from having a robust RFP process, and I agree with you, there are some instances where that happens. I'm not sure if there's such a robust field that's out there right now. When it comes to bus cameras, there are just not a lot of companies that are out there that are doing this. And so from that perspective, it's a little bit different from some of the other things that our schools purchase, where there are a lot of players out there and where we could possibly benefit from doing something a little bit different. But keep in mind, and I do always remind us of what our state law and limitations are, and Ms. O'Neill, who sits across from us, is an elected official just like us. There's state law that actually allows them to make those kinds of decisions, and they're held accountable by the same folks that we are when it comes to how they make those decisions. So I do want to extend deference to a fellow elected official who has to answer to her constituency as well about the decisions that they make under what is existing state law. So just wanted to put that out there.
I'm not saying this was the wrong decision. I just have questions about the process by which we go and the transparency of the process.
And respectfully, Councilmember Elrich, that is an opinion, but keep in mind, she also is entitled to her opinion as an elected official who is charged with running the school system.
There were two.
Yeah, Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, this is a very important conversation too, because I think at the end of the day, we do have to deal with that tension of, do you want to move forward because you understand the industry and you understand what we need quicker than going through an RFP process? But there is no doubt that, obviously, as much as possible, it is important to have that transparency. And I think that, when an RFP is so well constructed, it is so easy to be able to pretty much eliminate, those folks that obviously are not going to comply and don't qualify anyway. So I would just offer that I think more and more, obviously, we do get those calls and those questions about what does that mean? And even though MCPS does have the legal ability to do this, there is no doubt that I think as much as possible, it is very important to try to put things out there and to just, be able to say, and inevitably, I mean, for example, you guys know what the industry looks like. There is no doubt that that is true, but these processes are in place for a reason, and it is really for accountability purposes. So I would just say that, it is always useful to try to, err in the side of full transparency, understanding that we should not try to go with the lowest bidder if it's not going to produce, because at the end of the day, as my mother used to say, back in Venezuela, what's cheaper becomes more expensive. I know there's a translation there in English. At the end of the day, because then we'll have to come back and try to modify and or amend certain things, and we may end up with having to spend more money. So anyway, I just think that there is that tension always, but it's it's useful to try to go on the side of transparency as much as possible.
Anyways, pound foolish.
That's what it is in English. Okay.
Let me just piggyback off of something Councilmember Navarro said, because I do think it's incredibly important. It would be helpful, and I think that, when we come back to this at some point when we do our next iteration of transfers, to actually have an evaluative process of the vendors that are out there, just for the public's sake, so that they know who's out there, what it is that they're doing, what relationships they already have established. Some of the evaluative process that you go through, I know, as you talk and look at who's out there and deciding what makes sense, so how that decision was made it'll be helpful to see that, so that folks understand that it wasn't just, we're just going to bridge a contract with whatever. And I'm not saying my colleagues are saying that, but, folks out in the community do have questions. They don't understand the process and how it works. They're not involved in it. And so rightfully so, they're going to have questions. And so I do agree, Councilmember Navarro's statement about trying to elicit that transparency, even if it's not in terms of the RFP. And again, I agree with RFPs in some instances, and if you figure out a way to do it with this or decide to do it with that, I'd be supportive. But either way, I think that having that information that's out there and saying, well, there are only two vendors that really are doing this the way we do it, and then, this one is doing this or whatever, would be helpful to folks to really help them understand and be able to navigate. So
We will look into it, and when you join us this year, when we go to the General Assembly, because as you'll know, the expiration occurs, there are two other companies operating in the state of Maryland, Xerox, Conduit, and ATS. And you'll find out when we hear about their programs, you're going to hear that this is a Montgomery County issue because the other counties are not experiencing the same problem that we are. And the reason why they're not experiencing it, because their program isn't operated like ours. The technology is not capturing. Frederick still is using the Xerox cameras that we used as a pilot. and the other counties do not have a capture rate. So yes, we'll look into it, and unfortunately, you'll see it firsthand when you come with me.
And if any of you would like to come over and see how it works and see some of the video, and be more than happy to give you a little demonstration if you guys are interested in coming by.
You know, it's interesting because I'm looking at circles, yeah, 34, 35, et cetera. But to be honest, 33, well, yeah, when you look at, if you're looking at here, Wheaton, Glenmont, Aspen Hill, it's actually lower than when you're looking at, some areas in, I believe it's North Bethesda, and then a little bit more towards the east part of the county. And that is interesting because, we just had all those conversations about pedestrian safety. And I will say that I'm constantly, when I'm out there driving, I'm constantly monitoring to see. And inevitably, I think ever since we really started this program, I have not seen somebody just blatantly pass through in my district, where I drive most of the time. And people really have realized that you just have to. And I know that it's particularly interesting in the morning when everybody is during rush hour, because there are some spots especially going north on Georgia Avenue near Aspen Hill, where there are some apartment complexes, and there's just that long line of students, so you're really there kind of for a while, but everybody's very respectful. So I think it's interesting how, even though we have crazy amounts of violations, that, slowly people are beginning to really get the message that.
Our per bus per day rate drops a little bit because people are getting the message.
Yeah.
But these are crazy high numbers.
Yeah,
More
they
than I
still
thought
are.
it would be.
Yeah,
And we only have a third of the fleet out
Yeah,
there doing it.
exactly,
So
exactly.
the number is much higher than that in
Yeah.
actuality.
yeah,
We're just not able to capture them all right now.
right, yeah, no.
And
it's
the
very
thing that's not in there is, we see this video every day. The number of close calls
Yeah.
that we have is horrifying
Yeah,
when we
it's-
watch it.
right.
Every week they send them to my processors,
Yeah,
compile a group of them for the week, which we share with Todd and schools, and the near misses. It's frightening that
That
we
is
have
very
not had this
scary.
happen. We've
Yeah.
had one instance where we caught a student on video getting hit by a car. We've had many close calls. In fact, we gave an award to a elementary school crossing guard who
Saw
young
that
child
video.
was getting ready to cross the street and he grabbed him by the collar and pulled him back
back,
as the
yeah.
car went by, or he would have been hit.
That was a single lane roadway too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't even like multiple lanes in both directions. This was just people not paying attention. So
no, there is no doubt that
the
more.
benefit is clearly there.
Yeah.
We see it on a daily basis.
Yeah.
We earmark these videos for the chief staff meeting and things like that. The number of close calls is frightening.
Yeah,
that
no,
we have
and
not had
that's,
more students hit.
to imagine, not having those cameras, it's just, yeah.
Right, because like I said, we were amazed we're just amazed at what we're seeing and how frequently we're seeing it,
Yeah.
because we didn't expect it to be
Right,
like this.
that bad. Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to point out quickly two things that made us decide to go in this direction with this company was that no other vendor out there that was doing camera enforcement had a business model where they equipped the whole fleet. All of the others wanted to do the top 10 or 20% of buses that get the most violations. And this one said, no, our business model is going to be to provide the deterrent across all buses, which was very attractive to us. And this was the only vendor that was also providing along with that at no cost to the district internal video. There were no others, and we surveyed all vendors in this place. And it was one of the reasons that made us decide to go with this.
Todd, can you also address that, or Captain Odone or any of the MCPS representatives about the most recent incident with one of our school bus drivers and the internal cameras and how that helped to deal with a particular case? Ms. O'Neill.
Well, certainly, the numbers on the exterior cameras, it's shocking. Shocking how many people go by school. And I did recently, I was coming up to Rockville and personally witness drivers not stopping for the school bus. I was like, but equally important are the interior cameras. And to your point, the situation with the bus driver, But, even with matters of student discipline, as the board has heard appeals, we've seen videos of a fight on the bus, student vandalizing the seats, throwing a backpack out the window or a cell phone. To me, as horrifying and shocking the exterior situations, it's equally important having the interior cameras, and I'll let Andy or Todd speak to that.
Yeah, I don't know there's too much more to add except exactly what Ms. O'Neill said. The recovery investigative aspects are really significant for us. Obviously, we just had the devastating incident from August with the employee. I mean, it's really shaken us all. The everyday occurrences that Ms. O'Neill talked about are largely what the interior cameras are useful for. Disciplinary situations on the bus, investigations that we need to do. So we really value that, just in terms of exactly like Mr. Watkins said, just having the full package.
And I think it's important that we, for transparency, that people know that the police department does not actively review footage from inside the bus. We essentially are outside the bus. When an issue rises to an investigation by the police department, then we work through the basic subpoena process to get access to those. Now, our partners will tell us there's something there, there's something not there, but, so we still continue to work collectively. But I just want people to know that the police are not actively monitoring what goes on inside the bus. That's an administrative process by the schools. We take care of the outside, but when something arises, we will go through the process and we will get the evidence we need to document. And I think the cameras are supposed to deter behavior just like they do out on the road, and I'm hoping that they'll deter more on the bus. But when these tragedies occur in light of that situation, I'm glad we have the video because it makes it beyond a reasonable doubt and then makes our prosecutions easier.
Yeah, and
Sorry.
oh no, go ahead.
I just want to say thank you to the council for supporting this effort, and to the police department, who've been just incredible partners. And it just more and more we seem to be working even more closely than ever before. Whether it's on this program, whether it's on school safety through the Maryland Safe to Learn Act, and the tragedies last school year in other states and other counties. So we just appreciate the overall spirit of partnership among agencies, the support that you have given, and the continued convening opportunities like this to continue to spread the word about this program.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say one thing because again, as I think about my children who ride the school bus, everybody's children who ride the school bus, it's not even just about the discipline, but the safety. As we continue to hear challenges with bullying and other kinds of incidents like that, it certainly helps to have that. As a student says, look, this person keeps terrorizing me on the bus. We, as students, all know and have our own anecdotal stories about issues that happen on the bus and things like that, where it's more of a person said versus person said. But actually, then you can go back and say, well, look, Johnny, I saw you, and you were standing over, Peter, and you were intimidating him and hitting him on his head and whatever, and you need to, it gives the ability for our children to be protected as well. And so it's not just about the discipline, but it's also about fixing some of those challenges that are there also, right? And so I think that, again, it contributes overall to what we're talking about, which is ensuring that our kids are able to focus on what they need to, which is to learn and to grow as an individual so that they can be successful adults. And that's what our process is within our Montgomery County Public Schools. And so certainly the more things that we can remove as obstacles from them to get to that place is incredibly important. And this is one of them. I mean, it's one of the myriad of things that are out there, but they are important. So let me turn to, I really want to thank my colleagues because this was a great conversation. Oh, Councilmember Elrich. Yep.
Since we were talking about the incident on the bus, And I know we don't actively monitor the cameras, and we don't have the people to actively monitor every camera all day long. Are we looking at all at revising how we treat the camera footage? Particularly, for the vulnerable, kids like the ones who got victimized here. It may be very hard for them to ever come forward and give you a complaint, and you could wait. Obviously, in this case, we probably waited through numerous incidents before one person was able to give a complaint. So are we going to look at some modifications to how we treat the camera footage?
We are. We're in an evaluative process right now. Mr. Watkins, me, our special education department, as well as our IT folks and safety and security folks. So we're benchmarking, we're looking at costs, we're looking at capacity for storage. So we're in that process right now, and in this budget season, we'll be able to share more about it.
How long do you store the footage on the buses, do you know?
So on average, we get about 25 operating days on the hard drive on the bus. And we're looking at, so we're costing out all that kind of stuff, but we're definitely going to add something that's not based on instant. And we're trying to figure out how much we can do of that right now, but we're definitely going to add some of that to increase the deterrent effect with drivers to say, we want them to think, kind of just like random drug testing. We want every driver that comes to work, we want them to think, I might be drug or alcohol tested. We want them to think the same thing about video. My video might be watched today. So we're looking to increase the deterrent effect.
So there's a few different ways in which we can approach this, and we're just going through that process right now.
Thank you.
Mr. Roberts, that's a very important point, and I think that, again, I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I have a feeling that we would be very supportive of something like that to, again, we're talking about the safety of our kids and ensuring that, and so would be very supportive of an initiative like that. So look forward to working with you on that. Excellent. Mr. Howard.
So the only other thing I wanted to mention, the data, overall citation data from the program is on page 3. We've talked a little bit about the large numbers there, but on the next page, on page 4, we do have some data that the police department provided on the specific stops with the most violations. So these 5 locations, the 8800 block of Colesville Road, 1400 block of East-West Highway, 300 block of North Frederick Avenue, 5100 block of River Road, and 8800 block of Piney Branch Road account for 13.7% of all the violations that have occurred since the program began. So those are the 5 highest locations, and the top 2 both represent nearly 4% of violations. I think that's important data for MCPS and the police department to have as they review where stops are located and things of that nature, and how to address that. And also, they provided data on the repeat violations. So out of all the 50,000 violations since the program began, about 4%, a little less than 4%, have been repeat violations.
I did want to talk about this piece of it because I've heard from folks in the community, as I'm sure my colleagues have, about, well, if there's so many violations at those particular areas, why don't we move the bus stops and move them to a different area that's not there? Because apparently there's some sort of obvious misunderstanding of what the rules are there. It speaks to that there's a larger issue beyond the fact that people just aren't paying attention and violating. And so I'd like to give whoever would like to be able to respond to that. I have my own opinion, but I certainly want to hear from the folks who are doing this about whether or not they think that that's a viable solution to what we're seeing here in terms of the number of citations that are being issued.
So there are many, many places throughout the county where the only option for a bus stop is on a multi-lane roadway, right? There are, places where there's no place to walk along those roads, and we pick up at each driveway along them. There are apartment complexes and entrances where we can't get the bus into. So there's lots of places throughout the county where it's not feasible at all to move the stop. There are other places where if the more we detour back into the neighborhoods off of main roads, the longer bus routes take and the more buses we need to accomplish the mission of getting kids to school. So there's a fiscal impact to it also. There are places we get past a lot where either COMAR doesn't allow, or we certainly go beyond what COMAR permits and say we aren't going to have kids cross here. but we want the message to be clear. We don't want folks to try to figure out, is this a place where kids are crossing or not? We want them to stop every time they see the red lights of the school bus. So I think that enforcement in some of these places where kids wouldn't cross, certainly not designed to cross, we don't know things like, we had a student struck about a year and a half ago or so in a place where we don't have kids cross. But the parent was running late that day and decided to drop their kid on the other side of the roadway where we don't have kids cross, and they ran across. Because somebody violated the red lights of the school bus, the student was struck. So we know kids are unpredictable. And so we want the message to the public to be, every time you see the red lights of the school bus, whether that's on a multi-lane roadway or not, we want you to stop, with one exception. If you're on the other side of a physical median, you're not required to stop. That's the only exception. And we want that, we think that's a simple message. We try to spread it out. It's on the school's website, it's on the police website, it's in PSA. We try to get that message out, but that's the only exception, is when you're on the other side of a physical barrier. But moving the stops off of roadways like this is not as simple as many would claim it to be.
And of course, we support the school board where they deem the stop appropriate. We service them. I think it's important to point out the difference between us and some of the other programs in the state is we work hand in hand with the schools and the school bus drivers. After, as Mr. Heathering said, we were surprised by the number of violations, and I've acknowledged publicly that I was wrong. We averaged about 500 citations a year as a police department, and we could elapse that in one day. But we looked at the data they provided, we looked at the information that the officers gave us for historical, and then we actually had light duty officers do an assessment and find out if this route is a violation, has a lot of violations, what other routes are similar in nature to that one. And then we prioritized our cameras being put on those buses, and we continue to do that this way. So we're using data to help us make better decisions. Now this will be all moot once everybody is outfitted, but the other places, either the schools decide or nobody decides, or whatever bus the driver wants to take out that day is the decision. So I think the analytics are such that these locations have been problematic, probably well before we had school buses, and probably won't change. Although when you see the footage, it seems on these larger roads, if one stops, they'll all stop. But if the first one or two go, then you'll see 6 or 7 or 8 go. And so that's a human nature thing. I think we've seen that over the years. And that's why I'll continue to be on the soapbox and do my educational pieces. But I believe it's, the 3 main causes are still the main causes. We still have people that are not aware that paint doesn't protect and when you have to stop and when you don't. But I know distracted driving is a huge factor, because when we get people that call in to talk about it, they say, I didn't see the bus. But when you look, and they think it's just a picture on their citation, but then when we tell them it's a video and they play the video and you see it's clearly the case. And then the last one, we have people that literally will stop for a bus, stop for the bus on the second stop. But the third time that bus stops, they're passing it because they don't want to wait. They selfishly put their needs first. So, and on single lane roadways, there's no way people can't see it. So although these are the highest ones, we're getting them on every type of roadway in every part of the county. And, I give credit to the bus drivers. They've been a great, asset for us, and we use the data and the resources we have to make better decisions. And we know that once the buses are outfitted, they will change behavior, just like our speed cameras, where we had 30 or 40% of people going past that location at over 12 miles an hour, but within 1 year, it's under 1%. And that's where we know we're getting the bang for the buck. And I think a lot of the reason our fatal crash numbers, although we talked about the issue we had, overall, overarching, the one thing that I can say that we have done to make a difference, to cause the numbers to have a reason to decline, is the automated enforcement, because it's unrelenting. It always works. It doesn't take donut breaks or anything like that. But, you know, the police department were sensitive to that. But the bottom line is, it does work. And I have great confidence that once we get it all outfitted over time, these numbers will come down. They won't go to zero, but they'll come down to a reasonable weather, and we'll get that safety effect long term.
I just wanted to close by saying, and complimenting what you said about your bus drivers. I remember the first time my daughter was attending Kingsview, and there was a bus stop that's actually across the street from my neighborhood, across 118 at 118 and Crownsgate. And when I looked at the listing, it was the closest to my house. And so I said, oh, so she can go to this bus stop. And so when the bus was approaching, I had pulled down on Crownsgate and parked, and it said, okay, Kaylin, go ahead and cross. And the bus driver honked and said no, although traffic had stopped in this instance because the bus driver had deemed that it was still not a safe, because they know and are concerned about the fact that people do pass even though they have the stop sign out, and was concerned about the safety of my daughter. Now, I have to tell you that myself, I was like, I don't understand. You've got the stop sign out. She should be able to cross. But they had deemed, and when I followed up, that was the response. That's a great thing, because it's not only saying that, we should have folks that are obeying the law, but we also have our bus drivers that are really doing what they're supposed to, looking out for the safety of all of those kids that are riding. And that's the mindset that they have. It's the reason why they reached out to you to start this program. It was the impetus for it, was because bus drivers kept saying, we keep getting past, right? So this is in direct response to school employees, your bus drivers, who are concerned about the safety of kids. So I just really want to say, and I hope that you pass along to your drivers, that it's very clear and apparent to me that there's a huge concern about their safety and well-being of their students. And we see it, we understand it, and we appreciate it, and certainly want to work with you to continue to make sure we can do our part in supporting an initiative to work with them to ensure that happens. So, yes, Councilmember Albert.
So I may not have seen them, so if you've got them out there, tell me they're out there. But have you thought about putting signs that deal with, you have to stop for a bus on this side of a median, out on the roads with medians? Because that might be, because it seems you're getting a lot of violations there. And it might be a way of alerting people that you do have to stop, because I think people view this differently as being on a 2-lane road where you got 3 or 4 lanes going across. People may be thinking, there's no way anybody's running across the street here, so I don't need to stop.
It's a DOT question, and they've been apprehensive of putting additional signs. You'll see that signs can get lost if you're putting too many of them up. I know they've had up, school bus, Maryland law, must stop for school buses. I think those signs could be modified. I think if you're going to have the signs up, and they're big to start with, I think that extra line of information based on the data that we're getting is quite prudent, and I'll check with them. Most of them, unfortunately, are on state roads, and we're not going to go revisit that one from Tuesday, so we know we're going there.
Look, it doesn't hurt to revisit it with them and say, look, we really need this.
Oh, I always bring it up.
Look at our data.
Well, I think you know me. I'm not shy when I'm working with the state at all, but I also know I don't always get the effect that I want, but I'm not afraid to try, and I never will stop as long as I'm here.
Okay.
Councilmember Alberts, it is interesting, and Captain Didone, and I was thinking something along the same lines at these, especially at the ones with the most violations. And if you look at them, they're all, with the exception of Piney Branch. Piney Branch isn't a state road, but all the other ones that are the top 4 are. Mm-hmm. So River, Frederick Avenue, East West Highway, and Colesville are all state roads. And so
Piney Branch
is?
Number, yeah.
Oh, there it is. I didn't know that one. So, okay, there you go.
But it has merit.
Sure.
I think they had the signs we added on both sides of the road.
Yeah, so if we could work with our partners and then with T&E and DOT to say, hey, this is something for at least these top 5, maybe it'll help.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll encourage. Right. It certainly would. So that'd be something where, Mr. Howard, maybe we could draft a letter from the education, public safety government operations, if you'd like to, since it's all three of us anyway, we've got a trifecta. It's a beautiful thing. You know, to say, hey, this is something we'd like to see, that'd be great.
And they can work with me and
Mhm.
if they would like.
Excellent. Great.
Great.
All right. So I'll just ask, I know that, Mr. Howard, your recommendation is to approve the supplemental appropriation of $4.7 million as requested by the board. And so I'll just ask my colleagues without objection, and
Fine.
hearing none, we'll go ahead and approve that. All right? Thank you very much again for your great work and for the partnership. We look forward to hearing more in the future.
Thank you.
All right, we're adjourned.